Hey everybody, this is me, Caleb Lucas. Me and Chad Hudak put together this presentation on the presidency. So, just to give a brief background of why our country has a president, as I'm sure most people have heard of, once our founding fathers declared independence from Britain and won the Revolutionary War, there was a pressing need to establish some governing entity to protect the people, the property, and the like. Out of fear of becoming what they tried so hard to escape in Britain, the leaders of the late 18th century wrote the Articles of Confederation to solve this problem, which had a practically non existent central power. At, at the outtake of this draft of the Articles of Confederation, there were not many massive issues, but eventually the shortfalls of the document began to stand out, all leading up to the Shays Rebellion, which was a violent uprising of citizens that the central government couldn't solve and fix, which really highlighted that the U.S. needed a stronger central power to be able to handle issues like that in the future. And this is where the Constitutional Convention and the resulting Constitution came into play. So, the Constitution was a well crafted document to rule the nation, and it explicitly established who would be our leader, which was the president. And you can see in the first section of Article 2, it reads: The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. So, this portion clearly lays out that the President will be the primary central power and will serve in terms of 4 years. Of course, originally there was no limit on the terms a president can serve. However, George Washington, who was obviously our first president, set a long-standing precedent to step down after 2 terms, which lasted for a long time until FDR decided to extend past that, which is when they finally decided to create the 22nd Amendment that said a president can only serve for 2 terms with a max of 10 years given an odd circumstance where a VP steps up midterm. So, to give a brief recap of the duties of the president that were laid out in class Tuesday, the main part of a presidency is the express powers that are laid out in the Constitution, which include military commander in chief, judicial powers, chief diplomat of the U.S., chief executive of the U.S., and the legislative powers of the president. Now, each of these powers can be seen in action by the public in recent times. For example, in 2011, President Barack Obama was the one that gave the go-ahead on the special ops mission to take out Osama bin Laden, who was, of course, responsible for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Um, More recently, in 2019, President Trump acted as the chief diplomat when he met with Kim Jong Un to try and smooth over our long-standing tense relationship with North Korea. So those are just a couple examples of how the president has expressed their powers or has used their express powers um, in the recent past. Past the express powers of the Constitution, the president also retains delegated and inherent powers. Now, inherent powers are a unique set that, in a sense, are implied by the Constitution, but they're not explicitly stated. These tend to only come in play during times of war and emergency. It can include deploying troops to battle without congressional consent, managing relations with foreign states, and then a various wide range of executive orders. Um, and even more recently, that we would know, it can also include deploying National Guard in different states in times of social disruption. And then delegated powers are ones that are relinquished to the president by Congress, meaning that Congress has the ability to take them away if they ever see fit. And this is a more gray area of powers in the sense that they seem to overlap with the express powers of the president. Regardless, these can include the signing and vetoing of legislation, the ability to convene Congress, and the ability to receive ambassadors from other countries.
So, as we've already talked about, the president is one of the largest figures in the United States government. And being one of the largest figures, a lot of issues come with that. So, the biggest issue that people have with the presidency is the constant expansion of power. So, this includes, but is not limited to, the following. So, increasing the size of the executive branch, increasing access and control of information, greater media presence, and increasing political polarization. So, in increasing the size of the executive branch, the president basically does this because he has the power to create agencies. And agencies have executive authority in whatever area that they cover. So, for example, the Department of Defense basically protects the United States from enemies. And in that field, they have, supreme power, basically. So, some more examples: the president can use agencies for creating pollution standards for private companies, regulating labor relations between employers and employees, managing the nation's natural resources, and all sorts of more things. And if you think about it like in an analogy, the president is kind of like an octopus that has all of its tentacles controlling the different agencies that he has also created, and that kind of makes the president even more powerful. A real life example of this was in 2002 when George W. Bush was actually pre authorized to use armed force against Iraq, which normally he would have to like in a to be able to go and send troops in, he would have to, Congress would have to declare war and then he could. But in the future, because he had this pre authorized, permission, he used his agencies to go around Congress and make decisions on what he was going to do in the war in Iraq. So, as for the access and control of information, the president basically controls both the FBI and CIA because they're both executive agencies. The president actually appoints the director of the FBI. So, the director of the FBI is basically the president's pawn, and the CIA is an executive agency that reports directly to the president. And both of these agencies are very focused on intelligence gathering. So they have pretty much all the information the president could possibly need for whatever he needs to do. And as for the other branches, they have to bring any and all information to the president. They basically have to run it by him before making any like major decisions, like sending troops places or whatever else that they choose to bring towards them. And because of this, the president is constantly like a step or two above the other branches of government whenever, arguments are being made and decisions are being made. So that gives him a lot of power over the other branches. And as information becomes more and more valuable in the world, the power of the president will grow rapidly because of he is the only one who has, tons of control and access to the information. Another thing that is increasing the power of the presidency is the media. And this is because the media shows the president more than any other political figure, and it creates a really easily identifiable image of the president. So, like, if you saw a picture of Donald Trump, you like even just his face or like his hair, you know exactly that that's Donald Trump. Whereas, like, if we showed you, I don't know, a picture of, you know, one of the members of the House of Representatives, you probably wouldn't know who it was unless you were, voting for them or something. And at the same time, as the chief executive, he can influence political agendas by going public. And we talked about this in class the other day. The president can basically go, say a whole speech about whatever in an effort to get, the public opinion and support behind him. And that does work actually pretty well, we've seen in the past. But it's not a great base for executive power, like strong executive power. And the reason why people like to get behind the president, at least in the past, is because the president is basically seen as a figure that is standing up for the country. Like, he is the president is like the main guy pretty much, and that kind of creates, a big sphere of influence that he has. So, another thing that is increasing the power of the presidency is increasing political participation and party polarization. So, politics nowadays is almost completely party based. People are not really going out and trying to just do what is best. It's very rare to see now, especially in the, current presidential term. And so presidential power and passing legislation is completely based on the parties. Sorry. So if there's like a Republican president and a Democratic Congress, nothing's going to get passed because no one can agree on anything, and vice versa. But in a scenario where the president is from the same party that is in power in Congress, the president's power in a way is unchecked because Congress is going to do whatever they can to please the president, and that way they can get reelected because it'll also be like, hey, look at us, we're passing all of these, bills and laws and whatever else, and the constituents will be like, wow, they're doing a great job. And in that scenario, the president basically does whatever he wants because his supporters aren't going to say no to him. So he's pretty much unchecked in power there, and that could create a lot of problems in the future, and it will create a government that isn't really out for what America needs and is just there to, please each other and the president.
So, in thinking of political representation, there's this ongoing dance of sorts between the officials we elect and their governing tendencies. This battle is between two representative models, the trustee model and the delegate model, and technically a third hybrid model called the politico theory, which attempts to tightrope between the two. This is more applicable in theory than in practice. But so if you recall in Mayhew's The Electoral Connection, that piece of literature touches on this debate, only discussing congressmen as a subject of the argument. However, as pointed out in a Tufts University Journal review, these models can be applied to the presidency. So the big conflict here is that while in theory the delegate model is a more democratic system of governing, in practice it tends to lead to officials acting with selfish interests in an effort to get reelected by their core demographic they are aiming to please. For example, you can see this from Donald Trump. In his term, he has strategically made every move to specifically please his primary support base, which is majority working class white Americans with a lack of degree or formal secondary education, compared to the last Republican president before him, George W. Bush, who offered a very trustee model role as the president post 9/11. If you remember, which obviously we were all very little, but if you remember reading about it or hearing about it, when the nation was reeling in pain and tragedy post 9/11, Bush let go of trying to please his key demographic, and instead he rallied the nation together as a whole and did everything he thought that was best for the nation to bounce back. So if there's one thing that the current election we face today illustrates, it is how the ideology of a delegate model can generate much greater turmoil and divide between two parties, which in the future could cause an extensive amount of problems. So the debate would be, which obviously would be a subject of a whole nother presentation, but the debate is, will a delegate model in the future become more and more selfish in a president's sense to where they don't have the nation's interests at best?
And these are our sources that we use to create this presentation. Thank you.